In 1966, a German mechanic walked into a motorcycle show in Cologne and parked something that made grown men stop talking mid-sentence. It looked like a motorcycle. It sounded like a car. And underneath that fuel tank sat an engine that, by every rule of common sense, did not belong on two wheels. Nobody in that room had ever seen anything like it. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why some people still call it the most insane motorcycle ever legally sold to the public. His name was Friedel Münch, and this isn't some legend that got exaggerated over the years. This actually happened. Every number, every risk, every reckless decision you're about to hear was real. Friedel was born in 1927, and he basically grew up with grease on his hands. His father ran an automotive workshop, and that's where young Friedel learned how machines actually worked, not from books, but from taking things apart and putting them back together, over and over, until he understood them better than the people who designed them. During the war, he served as a Luftwaffe technician, which meant working on aircraft engines under enormous pressure, where a mistake wasn't just expensive, it could get someone killed. After the war, he went to technical school and trained formally in mechanical and electrical engineering. By the time he was in his 20s, he wasn't just good with machines, he was dangerous good. He landed at Horex, a well-known German motorcycle brand, working in their racing and tuning department through the late 1940s and into the 1950s. This is where he built his reputation as a man who could squeeze performance out of an engine that its own designers didn't think was possible. But here's the twist. In 1956, Horex collapsed, went completely bankrupt. For most people, that's the end of the story. Your employer is gone. You find another job. You move on. Friedel didn't move on. He bought the leftover factory and the remaining stock of parts and bikes, and he kept going, on his own, with almost nothing but his own stubbornness. Now here's where it gets interesting, because Friedel had a problem. He wanted to build the fastest, most powerful motorcycle in the world. Not the fastest Horex, not the fastest German bike, the fastest motorcycle, period. And the issue was simple. Every motorcycle engine available to him in the early 1960s was too small, too fragile, or too unreliable to survive the kind of power and abuse he had in mind. He needed something stronger, something built to a completely different standard. And then one day, he was looking at a friend's car, an NSU Prinz, a small, unremarkable West German compact car. He popped the hood and looked at that little air-cooled four-cylinder engine sitting in there, and something clicked in his head that hadn't clicked for anyone else in the motorcycle world. Car engines are built tougher than motorcycle engines. They're designed to run for years without complaint, hauling families around, sitting in traffic, taking abuse that no motorcycle engine of that era was designed to handle. So why not just take that engine out of a car and put it into a motorcycle? It sounds almost too simple, but nobody had actually done it. Not like this. And doing it properly was nowhere near as easy as the idea sounded. Friedel designed his own frame, based on the legendary Norton featherbed frame, which at the time was considered the gold standard of motorcycle handling. He had to modify the NSU engine's mounting brackets to physically narrow it enough to fit between two wheels without the rider's knees hitting the block. He built a custom dry sump lubrication system, so the oil wouldn't starve the engine under the kind of stress a motorcycle puts on it that a car never would. And in a decision that seemed almost reckless at the time, he kept the car's own electrical system instead of using a typical motorcycle setup, because he'd realized the automotive electronics were simply more reliable. Piece by piece, in a small workshop, with a small team, he built a monster. He called it the Mammoth. And when he wheeled it out at the Cologne Motorcycle Show in the fall of 1966, the room genuinely did not know what to do with itself. Remember, at this point, a big German motorcycle had an engine somewhere around 250 to 350 cc. A 500 cc bike was treated like a Porsche, and here was Friedel Münch, standing next to a motorcycle with a 1000cc four-cylinder engine borrowed straight out of a family car. It wasn't just big, it was fast. Properly, dangerously fast, for its era. Depending on the version, the Mammut could crack 100 miles an hour in around 11 seconds and push on toward a top speed of 115 to 137 miles an hour, all delivered with a smoothness that motorcycle engines of the time simply couldn't match. Because, remember, this engine was never designed to vibrate itself apart the way a stripped-down bike engine did. It ran like a sewing machine at speeds that terrified other manufacturers, and it wasn't cheap either. A Mammoth cost around $5,135 at a time when a full-size BMW motorcycle sold for under $2,000. People weren't just buying a bike, they were buying the fastest, most over-engineered machine money could put on two wheels, and they knew it. But here's the part most people don't expect. This wasn't a one-off stunt bike that disappeared after the show. Munch kept improving it. The engine grew to 1177 cc, then eventually 1200 cc. He gave it an electric starter and disc brakes at a time when plenty of motorcycles still expected you to kickstart them and stop using drum brakes. Wealthy riders and even a few well-known names of the era, including people from European high society who wanted the fastest thing available, sought these bikes out specifically because nothing else came close. And Munch wasn't done chasing speed. In 1970, his team built a stripped-down, race-tuned version nicknamed the Daytona Bomb, aiming to break the one-hour world speed record that Mike Halewood had set years earlier on an MV Agusta. The Daytona Bomb absolutely demolished that pace, running average speeds around 178 miles an hour. But there was a brutal problem nobody could solve in time. No rear tire on Earth could survive that kind of speed and heat for more than a handful of laps before it started coming apart underneath the rider. The record attempt never fully succeeded. Not because the bike wasn't fast enough, but because 1970s tire technology simply couldn't keep up with what Friedel Münch had built. Now you'd think a story this good would end with the guy becoming rich and famous. It didn't. Building bikes almost entirely by hand, in small numbers, with expensive imported engines, is not a cheap business model, and Munch struggled financially for years. At one point, he even lost the legal rights to use his own family name as a trademark, and had to sell his own motorcycles under a different label. In 1973, he brought on a business partner, and just 2 years later, in 1975, Friedel Münch walked away from the company that carried his own name. But he never actually stopped building. He revived the old Horex name for a new turbocharged machine, putting out well over 100 horsepower. In the early 1980s, he engineered a 160 horsepower monster called the Titan 1800 for an American collector, using a supercharger built by Felix Wankel himself, the same engineer behind the rotary engine. In 1991, Friedel suffered a stroke. Most people would have called it a career permanently. He didn't. He spent years recovering. And in 1997, in his 70s, he finished one final machine, the Mammut 2000, closing the loop on the idea he'd started chasing more than 30 years earlier. Friedel Münch died in 2014. Only around 500 original Mammoths were ever built. Today, a single restored one can sell for well over 100,000 euros. Sitting in private collections and museums, because collectors understand exactly what they're looking at, not just an old motorcycle. The bike that proved a stubborn mechanic with a car engine and a welding torch could outbuild every major manufacturer in the world, using nothing but a Norton frame, a family sedan's engine, and the sheer refusal to accept that it couldn't be done. That's the story of the man who put a car engine in a motorcycle, and then spent the rest of his life proving it wasn't a fluke.